Hello, protocols, packets, and programs. Welcome to October, when tales of terror become timely and horror marks our days to Halloween. We humans have so many ways to express fear, from the simple horror of C to the supernatural horror of C++, from serialized creatures with features like Java and Kotlin, or brain-eating zombies like Perl. We have psychological horror like JavaScript integers, and horror plus comedy like Perl. We have ghosts and thrillers like Go and Rust, but however they promise us safety or type checking that's weak or strong, they all, every one, begin with that simple phrase that haunts us for so long. Hello, world. Which means this week we chat with Lina Lau about crafting presentations and training courses that keeps people's attention and leaves them with something new that they've learned about. In the news segment, a deceptive dependabot, a manipulated jot, a bomb for hardware, a critical list for open source, and more. Get spooky and stay tuned for Application Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals.
It's the show to learn the latest tools and techniques to understand DevOps, applications, and the cloud. Your trusted source for the latest AppSec news. It's time for Application Security Weekly. AI, accelerated cloud adoption, and hybrid work are fundamentally shifting how business gets done. The old way of securing your people, apps, and data doesn't work and scale anymore. To stay ahead, today's organizations need to reimagine their security and networking infrastructure with a cloud-first, unified SASE architecture. Join Palo Alto Networks and leading technologists from across the globe for SASE Converge 2023, a two-day virtual experience, November 15th through 16th, revealing how SASE, powered by advanced AI, can drive better security and networking outcomes. Register today at securityweekly.com/Palo Alto. This is episode 257, recorded October 2nd, 2023. I'm your host, Mike Shima, and I'm here with John Kinsella. Hello, John.
Do you ever wonder if zombies like single panes of glass?
Oh, that's that's I think demonic horror. I neglected to mention the single pane of glass. But thank you for that additional genre to our horror. We also have an additional genre to our podcast host with Akira Brand. Hello, Akira. It's been a while.
Hi, Mike. It's been a minute. I was curious, since you like horror so much, if this is like your favorite month.
Every day is Halloween. So everybody in the background now just starts singing along Boppy Bop Bop to one of the best Ministry songs out there. The other thing you can do is think about how we are celebrating the milestone of reaching over 1,000 members of our CISO community. The Cybersecurity Collaboration Forum is a one-stop shop for executive collaboration comprised of CISOs across various industries. If you want to be part of this growing community of CISOs, join us as a member or technology partner. To learn more, visit securityweekly.com/cybersecurity collaboration. Lena is the founder of Sintra, an advanced cybersecurity training focused on APT techniques and detections. She has an extensive background in leading complex incident response engagements, where she was formerly the principal IR consultant at SecureWorks, APJ, and the APAC incident response lead for Accenture ANZ, where she built and set up the IR capability for the ANZ region. She has worked multiple international cases covering sectors such as national defense, banking, energy, and manufacturing. Lena is also a Black Hat trainer, SANS advisory board member, and has presented at several international conferences and authored a book on cybersecurity. Hello, Lena. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, thank you again for having me.
We are happy to have you back. In fact, we last spoke in episode 230 about the incident responders view of AppSec. But what we'd love to have you back now is to talk about presentations. In fact, one of the things that we talk about in general is the importance of communication as part of fostering collaboration. We work with other people, and especially in incident response, you've gone through some communication skills in high-stress situations.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, incident response, I think what makes someone a really good incident responder is the ability to be able to clearly communicate to different stakeholders at different levels about what is going on and what, like, the repercussions of the incident and the impact of what the findings are. I think a lot of incident responders, when they first get into the field, focus a lot on the technical aspect, which is obviously incredibly important, but being able to distill the findings and tell, someone at the C-suite level, someone at the managerial level, what the findings mean and the implications of it is what separates a good incident responder technically with someone who's excellent at the job.
And one of the positive feedbacks we got on your episode too was how clearly you're clearly practiced at delivering concise answers and clear answers on these topics.
It's forced learning.
but I think it's practiced, right? And that's one of the things we wanted to learn more about is how did you get to that point? Because everybody, not everyone is necessarily speaking to boards, speaking to executives about incident responses. But what you just said about being able to understand the audience, to talk to an audience, to craft that message to an audience boils down to presentations and to training courses that you do as well. And in fact, you've just recently done a presentation yourself. And I think it would be fun if you could give us maybe a 60-second overview of what that presentation was. And then let's actually do a postmortem on it. What you felt went well, what didn't go well. So here you go, Lena, on the spot.
Yeah, awesome. So last Thursday, so just a few days ago, I was at Canberra, the capital city of Australia. I was presenting at Beesides Canberra. It was actually my first time presenting with the conference. I was doing a talk on hacking the cloud. So I broke down 2 technical techniques and I had a 30-minute slot to kind of present these 2 techniques. And what happened prior to me getting on stage was I made the mistake of peeking through the back door to see how many people were there. And I was shocked. And I think that triggered anxiety prior to me getting on stage. But I think that's normal, right? No one is like, oh, I can't wait to go and stand in front of 1,000 people.
But that's amazing. I just want to highlight, here's someone, you've done black hat training for probably a few hundred attendees by now. You've done presentations, but still the anxiety hits in, right? So
I don't think it ever leaves. Yeah, I think it's a natural human reaction. I don't think anyone is about to present and feels like, oh, 100%, I can't wait to do this. I think that's a pretty psychopathic response. I think it's more natural to be anxious about what you're presenting, because it's scary.
So you were completely anxious. So now, don't keep us in too much suspense. What did you talk about and how did you feel it went?
Well, I think the second I step out on stage, that's normally when my anxiety dissipates. So the second I start talking, I stop being nervous. And then I feel more in my element. I think it went really well. I put in a few jokes. The audience laughed. Yeah, it was good. I stepped out from the podium. Yeah, it flowed really naturally. And, I was able to feel relaxed enough to kind of just throw in some personal anecdotes and veer off the script.
This is neat because you've already hit a couple things I think we want to unfold a bit. One is you told a couple jokes. You felt comfortable. You walked away from the podium. You didn't hide behind it. You had some anecdotes. So I'm sort of giving us a chapter list, if you will, of items to go on. Maybe let's start with the first one. Obviously, would you like to share one of those jokes now and see if it still lands?
That joke will not land. Those jokes are contextual.
But that's so wonderful point. So tell us about using humor, as a presenter, and especially too, if you've ever had a joke that didn't land, how did you recover from that? Because especially if you're already anxious, that could be kind of tough for a presenter.
So the way that I use humor is I tend to tie it to known things. For example, people are all frustrated. I don't know many people that use Yammer in their day-to-day workspace. So, making jokes about commonalities that everyone has or recognizes. I think the point where a joke goes wrong in presentations is when you make it too niche and you make it target just such a specific audience that everybody else doesn't really understand what the joke is. I think that's the core mistake. So you got to make the joke wide enough that most people, even non-technical people, would get it. I'm
thinking back to some Conan the Barbarian intros I've made in the past that have been extremely niche, perhaps. But, so you talk about, there's the theme of, there's probably memes can fall into that as jokes, using humor. These are good ways to build a rapport with your audience. You also mentioned, you told some personal anecdotes. Now these, and I think you mentioned too, they're, slightly off script. It's hard to say I'm going to plan for the ad lib or I'm going to plan my off script. But, what made you pull those anecdotes? Why did that feel like a good thing to do?
I think when you're explaining a technical concept or you're delving really deep into a specific topic, it's really easy, especially in a large chunk of time, to lose the attention of your audience. And so when you add little injections where you just go off script, tell a little story, it kind of brings the focus back onto what you're saying. And it helps break up this dense chunk of information with something a little bit more lighthearted and easy to digest.
So a lot of this then is about preparing. I want to go back to that idea of preparing for presentations. And you mentioned, you've done a lot of these incident response. You've talked to boards, talked to different audiences. Tell us a little bit about your process that works for you, or processes that you've seen be successful even for others, if you've given them advice about putting that story together of the presentation, whether it's plan the jokes, plan the anecdotes, plan the memes, etc.
I think the first thing is understanding of who you're speaking to. So in the case of an IR, understanding which stakeholder you're about to present to, and then thinking about what it is that they would care about the most. For example, if you're talking to a board, they don't care about necessarily the sexy techniques you discovered or how difficult it was for you to uncover them. They care more about the implications of the breach on the organization and what that results in terms of actions that the organization needs to take, whether it's a new security tool or whatever it is that they need to do. Whereas if you're talking to a technical team that are on the ground and needing to actually remediate what you're doing, then sliding in some of that technical detail is important, because it gives them the background of why they're doing a specific remediation. If you're speaking to a manager, then the conversation needs to be more about the actions that needs to be taken during an IR or an incident. When it comes to a presentation, I think the core thing is understanding who the audience is. Is it a technical crowd you're presenting in front of? Is it a mix of students and technical crowd? Or is it more like a high level group of people? Or is it just a mix of every single person in the industry all sitting in front of you? I think that sets the pace and the foundation of how you build the presentation. And I think a lot of people go, okay, well, my presentation is a technical one, so I just want to talk about the technical aspect. But the second you go in with that mindset, you lose your ability to kind of connect and engage the rest of the audience. And I think it is completely possible to turn an extremely extremely technical talk into something that's digestible even to a high level audience. And I think that should always be the aim, to be more inclusive in how you present.
So, Lena, speaking of alchemy, right? Turning one thing into another thing, I'm curious about what do you do when you have to present in front of a bunch of people and you are not feeling well? Maybe you're really sick that day. Maybe you're feeling underprepared. A little context for this is that before I got into APSEC, I used to be an opera singer. That was my job, right? I did that for 10 years. And we would have different approaches to singing when we were sick versus singing when we felt well. So I'm curious, in that world, what do you do?
To be honest with you, I am pretty masochistic. I'm able to just be sick and still present. I think it's because I work in IR, so it's long work hours and, sometimes you're sick, but you're still on the case and you don't want to let your team down. So you just show up. But I think when it comes to that, it just comes down to practice, getting to a point where you're able to be sick and not quite there in the head, and yet you know your content well enough that you can just still deliver it. You may not be delivering it with the same level of energy and enthusiasm that you normally would if you weren't sick, but that's just the unfortunate part of it, which is fine as well. As long as you know your content, it doesn't matter. You don't necessarily have to smile the whole time.
That opens up another aspect too, to get maybe a little bit tactical about the presentation, because the slides themselves can also be references for you as the presenter, being oh, here is the slide or the image where I want to make this point. Here's the cheat sheet, if you will, that the audience doesn't necessarily know what I want to hit. one of the, that goes into memes. I want to start sort of maybe beginning to end of how you put together this recent presentation. One of the common things we see in a presentation is the About Me slide, which can also become the About Me mini presentation that goes 3 slides long. This is who I am. This is why I'm so interesting and I'm important. You have to listen to me. How do you approach that? And especially too, have you ever been challenged, Lena, on just like, why is she up here telling us this? Like, why should we listen to her?
I think that question of why should we listen to this person needs to be answered with your presentation. So by the end of the presentation, if they hear everything that you've said, all your research, and they're still asking that question, then that's something for you to take back as feedback and say, okay, what did I not give, or what didn't I present well enough? If the content is good enough, that already is enough for someone to go, I want to find out more about this person, or this person's research is really interesting. I want to get to know them better. I think setting the scene for who you are makes sense in some contexts, but it doesn't make sense if you're sitting there going on about who you are for 5 to 10 minutes straight. It can just be a really simple one sentence, because people generally, if it's a conference about specific topics and you're presenting about a specific topic, they're there to listen and learn about the topic, not to sit there and learn about you as who you are or your biography.
Yeah, and I can imagine, like, from Akira's perspective, like, I was an opera singer, so here I'm going to build some empathy about an approach, like an outsider's approach to APSEC, to development. Like, let's simplify this or give a different aspect as well. And I think, John, you were going to mention
I was just
something
going to
there.
riff off what Lena's last comment there was. Is how do you get someone into that room, right? So we were talking off air about, there was a talk I was at recently where, like, this guy was in front of us, got on stage and started talking. Like, there was no intro slide. I think he had no slides at all. And I'm like, who is this? I don't want to say who it is now because, like, it'll give away what show I was at, or where it was. But, like, I think either you need to have that, everyone knows Lena. It's like, oh my God, Lena's here. We'll go talk go to Lena's talk. But if it's someone who's new on the block, but maybe they've done some really great research or something, how did they get in front of that space, right? So either they need to have, like, someone pushing them out there, like Lena saying, hey, go to this person's talk, they're awesome. Or if I know we're going to get to talking about, oh my God, my brain. We're going to get to talking about CFPs and that type of thing. But maybe it's how you get that person, how do you select that talk or what that talk, how it's advertised. But yeah, so maybe it doesn't have to be the About Me slide, but still, how do you, because at least for me, if I'm sitting in a room and, like, it's not interesting, the laptop comes out or the phone, I'll do something else. So it's still a bit of a problem, I think.
Yeah, I think there's ways of sliding in precedence of who you are and why you're there without having an About Me slide. Like, for example, you could kick off the talk, like, let's just say you're talking about, I'm just mind blanking for a topic. Cloud security. You're talking about cloud security. You can just slide in, when I was doing IR at X, the way that we would see blah, 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 blah. Like, you can slide in little things about who you are and personal details in the middle of your presentation without having to actually have a separate slide for it. Like, you can slide in examples of your experiences, things that you've done, things that you've seen, your life story, thread it through the presentation.
And that, I think, hits to what you mentioned early on, too, about you were telling anecdotes. That makes it, hopefully that makes it feel like it resonates, it connects with the audience as well. So in a little bit of the tactical, kind of practical aspects, what do your slides look like? Is it a meme? Is it a bunch of list of bullet points? Is it a cat in the background? What do you, how do you format them that is your style, Lena?
I aim for around 60% split, 60 to 40, 60% just pure image slides, nothing else, no words. And then 40% words, but it's not bullet points. It's like box pointing to another box. Hard to explain, but more like flow, like little diagrams. Versus just dot bullet points. Yes. I try to avoid bullet points.
I realize I asked you to, on an audio venue like this, describe the visuals that you do. But I think you did a good job there. And one of the things that I've seen, and I've done myself, so this is my projection, early on, my presentations were lots of bullet points because that was easy for me as a presenter to say, oh, this is what I'm supposed to say. This is what I want to say next. This is the point I want to make. And everybody needs to understand the points. That's why I put it on the slides. I was nowhere near the 60-40. I'm probably closer to 80-20 even myself now. But then how do you approach for the practice? How do you pace yourself? How do you know what your story is going to be when you just have that image, for example?
I think the way that I build a presentation is I start off with the story. So I ask myself, what do I want the audience to get out of it? Like, what is the resounding feeling? It might not be like an emotion, but it might be like a takeaway point. What do I want them to leave my presentation with? Is it, wow, I learned this technique and I'm going to go back to my company and do XYZ and check that we were able to defend and detect these threats, or whatever the goal is. Then I go, okay, what's the best way for me to present this information that inspires them to have that result? So then I tell the story, and I always start off with the impact, because I know that the audience is going to, like, if you just go straight into your presentation and start talking about technical details and you don't explain why you're even presenting about it, or why the topic is even important, you already lose half of the audience. What I find in a lot of technical presentations is the presenter starts off by talking about the technical topic, and then their process on how they found or did the research, and then the last slide or the last 3 or 4 slides is why this matters. This resulted in X CVE, this resulted in blah, 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 blah. But by the time that you hit that point, you've already lost the attention span of the audience for the entire duration of your presentation. If you started off with the impact of your presentation, like, I did this research, it resulted in X amount in bug bounty, and it resulted in this CVE being found, which impacted X organizations in the world, and this allows a threat actor to do XYZ. You're more inclined to listen because you're like, okay, wow, I need to know about this. Tell me more about it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I think I'm now don't need to name names here, but it sounds like some of this is coming from perhaps bad or less than stellar presentations that you've had to sit through. So I'm curious, has there been a presentation that has put you to sleep or has just wanted to make you try to sneak out of the room, but you're sitting in the front row and you can't do it without being too obvious?
Yes, sometimes I've been to a lot of presentations where I've gone, okay, wow, this abstract is awesome. The talk title is incredible. This is definitely a topic I really want to go and listen to. And then I've attended the talk. And what has occurred is that I feel that the presenter may not have maximized the topic as much as they could have. It's just in how they present and how they talk about the topic. They lose the story element, and the second you lose the story element in your presentation, you lose the audience because the audience doesn't know why you're talking about it. I think the thing that presenters forget is while the audience is incredibly intelligent, you can't forget about the fact that they don't want to sit there and piece together what you're saying like a puzzle. They're not sitting there listening to your presentation going, damn, I can't wait to piece together this puzzle and figure out all the subtleties. You have to make it as obvious as possible to them and keep referencing why you're speaking about things, just to make it so easy for them to, without using their brain, to understand what you're saying.
I think that's a good tie into what John had foreshadowed as well, because even before you get to the presentation stage, you also need to get past that CFP board, and you sit on the review board for SANS. So what are, again, don't need to name names on the bad side, but an abstract needs to grab that review board's attention as well, even before you're going to prove that you can hold an audience's attention. What have you seen about, what's a good abstract versus a poor abstract, one that's just going to get passed over?
I think what makes an abstract good in terms of a response to a CFP is the first sentence needs to clearly state the problem. A lot of abstracts think, okay, wow, there's a word limit of 750 words or whatever the abstract limit is. That means I can go ramble about the problem for 750 words. But no one's really going to go and read 750 words. I will because I'm reading the abstracts, but if you're going to a talk, no one's going to actually read 750 words. If you haven't succinctly spelled out the problem within the first 1 or 2 sentences and how and why you're addressing the problem and how you're going to address it and what the audience is going to take away within the first 3 to 4 sentences, you've already lost the bulk of attention, right? A good abstract is succinct. It knows the problem really well. It tells you what you're going to get out of it. And if you're able to put all of that together in a really short abstract, it already tells you that this person knows the topic extremely well. They understand how they're going to communicate, and it already shows that they're a good communicator. Unless someone wrote the abstract for them, which you won't know.
Yeah, which you won't know. And I was going to ask, and I might have just stepped on John's question right here, is that would you have ChatGPT write that abstract, or have you seen those write that abstract for you?
I love ChatGPT. I see no issues with using ChatGPT, but the way that I would use it is I would write an abstract and then I would pass it through ChatGPT and ask ChatGPT to make it more succinct, or use ChatGPT to insert humor, or use ChatGPT to make it less serious, or, I would use it to edit something you've already written instead of getting it to write something from scratch. Because, if you're presenting novel research, ChatGPT is not going to know how to describe. It's probably not ingested as a part of its training model.
No, and I'll also add too, it's not going to be your voice. It's not going to be your anecdotes, your personal delivery style either.
Lena, I have a question for you. I want you to talk about appealing to emotion and how you do that in your talks.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think something that that automatically connects you to an audience is the sense of vulnerability as a speaker. A lot of the times you have a presenter on stage, and I feel there's almost like this unspoken pressure on the presenter to be perfect. To be the absolute perfect person on this presentation, or know this topic better than you in the audience. And I think it breaks down the wall a bit if you're able to be vulnerable and point out mistakes that you made as you did your research, things that you want to improve on, or just like little personal things that break down that wall and make you seem more human, or humanize the presentation a little bit. Because just for example, you could be talking about your research, presenting something you found, and then you could also talk about all the things that you tried and didn't work and make a joke out of it. That immediately breaks down that wall between the audience and you, and it makes you likable as well, to be honest. Instead of being like, I did this and it was perfect on the first go. How funny.
And possibly too, and we've talked about this, prior to being on air too, even calling attention when that joke just bombs, calling attention to it and say, well, that didn't work. Suddenly that's one of the ways of getting that emotional side of people back onto your side. That, okay, let's point that out and move on.
Yeah.
Lena, one of the things too is one of the things I've avoided talking about are too many of the specifics of you must have these many slides, these many bullets per slides, or this many slides per minute, or things that are very subjective and don't fit to different people's presentation styles. But I do still want to ask, you gave a 20 to 30 minute presentation. You like that 60-40, balance of just pure image versus some text. Roughly, how long does it take you to prepare for how long did it take you to prepare for that presentation? How many slides were you comfortable with to present in a 30-minute time frame?
30-minute time frame, I had around 25-ish slides. In terms of how long it took me to build the content, not super long, because cloud security is kind of my bread and butter, so it was just a natural thing for me. It took longer for me to build the deck into a story than it did for me to build the content. So I focused most of my time in shifting the slides, making sure the story makes sense, kind of running through the story in my head and thinking of points where I might lose people's attention, and really, really nailing it down so that I know how to fill 25 to 30 minutes, and I know the weak points in the presentation where someone might get bored or zone out, and thinking of how I can kind of make that better. That's kind of what I prepare the most on.
That type of self-awareness can be really hard to build up. Is that something, is there a particular tricks, techniques you have that makes that click to say, oh, I think somebody just fell asleep here? Or do you have some trusted friends, or do you even record yourself, play it back? How do you build that self-awareness without being overly critical of yourself?
I like presenting it to one or two close friends, but if that doesn't work, sometimes you just know based on how you present. I'm sure we've all been in a situation where we've been presenting and you're kind of bored yourself as you talk about something.
Not a good sign. Yeah.
Exactly. If you are feeling the inkling that you're kind of bored, or you want to stop talking about X subject and quickly get onto slide 10 because slide 10 is way more exciting, that's already a sign, because the audience can pick up on that emotion of you being bored by yourself with your own topic. It's like an unspoken kind of just an innate feeling that they have. So if you have that feeling, 100% the audience will get that same feeling back.
So one of the aspects, we've been talking very much about conference presentations, but you also do training. And training, if I'm working on a metaphor here, a conference presentation is just a quick sprint, whereas a training is a marathon, because we're talking multiple hours, if not multiple days. So what's the difference in approach here, both in just, do you still have a story with training? Tell us how you approach that.
I think the trick with training is to get to know the people that you're training outside of the training time. So during break times, during lunch times, try to forge a personal connection with them. When you're in a room and everyone is trying to learn a subject, there's a lot of introverts in our industry. A lot of them won't necessarily be vocal about things that they don't understand, or they might just not even, they might be shy. They don't want to disturb the rest of the cohort. They don't want to put up their hand or ask you to repeat things, or, that's just a common personality trait. And the only way that you're going to be able to get over that and connect with those people and make sure that they're engaged and excited is by talking to them outside of during break times and figuring out how you can improve as a trainer, or how you can, better go through certain topics in a way that helps them understand what's going on without pointing them out or pulling them out in front of everybody.
Social engineering your students.
Yeah, yeah, essentially.
Lena, I'm curious, in the world of music, there's usually really, really clear forms that musicians follow when they're writing something. So for example, pop music, verse, chorus, bridge, chorus, the end, right? There's sonata form, there's symphonic form. We could go on this for hours, but we're not going to, because that's not what we're here to talk about. However, what I think we are trying to point to is we're wondering, is there some kind of form, especially for trainings, that you follow when you're creating it, like a pattern that you create your trainings off of that you can replicate over and over and over again, just with different content?
Yeah, I think the approach that I take to trainings is the same as I take towards presentations. I build it around a specific story. In the case of my training, it's not so much a story, but it's an incident. So throughout the course of 2 days, the participants are working one incident, and the training follows the incident as if we were working a real IR engagement. And so the way that the students, every single finding, every single topic is somehow linked to this core story or this core incident. And that incentivizes the students to kind of focus more, instead of being like, oh, okay, I can just zone out of this topic and then come back later, because that then impacts their findings for the rest of the whole, quote, engagement, the fake engagement.
And that's got to be part of keeping their attention as well. Because to riff a little bit about it, from Akira's perspectives, even these long ballets, long operas have some intermissions, give people some breaks. So there's only so much information you can deliver at a time. How do you usually structure that training as well for these stories? This chapter, does it end on that cliffhanger, or does it end on that summary of this is just what we just learned? A little bit, some of that structure of what you're creating.
Yeah, so I tend to keep talking blocks to 40 to 1 hour maximum. I will not speak longer than that. And then when I hit that point, that's when they go into labs, and we do lab exercises, and we put into action what we've just learned. And then we do a debrief and talk about what the implications of the findings mean, as if it were a real incident. Sorry, the context is I run incident response trainings. That's why it's structured around an incident. Yes. So that's basically how I do it. I break it up with a lab. Then they find their findings, we go through the debrief, the implications of the findings, and then we move on to the next section. So it's never just I'm standing there talking for 2 days straight.
And what's interesting to me is that the training, very clearly, and I absolutely understand, is that it's very interactive. You want that feedback. You're interacting with the audience throughout the day, telling them that story. Is anyone falling behind? I think that's a little bit different from presentations, which tend to be very just one-sided until you get to that end where somebody stands up and says, I have more of a comment than a question. How have you handled, or how would you like to see conferences or even presenters handle that Q&A section at the end of a presentation so that it can actually be useful to you? Put your hand down.
Man, The Q&A section is honestly rogue. It's so funny. Sometimes you get people who ask questions, but they're not really a question. It's just a statement. They just want to put up their hand and tell you their opinion. I think the best way to handle it is just to let people say what it is that they want to say in the forum that they choose to, whether or not it's in front of the whole conference, whether or not it's private, however they want to say it, and then just listen to them. I mean, that's all you can do. And if you have input, provide input. Or if they bring up something that you don't know or something completely adjacent to the topic you're talking about that for some reason they related to your topic in their brain, just, be honest. If it's something you don't know about, just tell them. This isn't an area that, I know too much about, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts. And
I have a statement, not a question. I'll have a question too, but first, on that's my hand was being raised. One of my personal pet peeves is like speakers who don't repeat the question, like when you're watching them on YouTube later, and someone from way back in the room, like, wait, what did they ask? But the question for you, Lena, right as we started talking, you mentioned the phrase came out of your mouth, forced learning. We were asking about how did you become who you are? How did you become this stage personality, if I can use that phrase? And my sense is, we've talked to a few people on this subject now around like, how do you present? How do you either internally or on a stage or on a podcast or what have you? I'm guessing you like tech in general, and probably I think you have a pretty fond of security and IR. So the question for you is, have you ever given a topic on a subject which you don't like?
Oh, absolutely, all the time. Yeah, I talk a lot about topics I don't like. Not now that I do training.
Not like on a stage,
but I mean, like, yeah. Like previously, for example, I used to work in consulting. So, for example, whatever thing that the consulting company wants to push, I have to somehow talk about that topic, even if it's not something that I personally care about. But it doesn't matter. There's always a way of taking a topic you don't like and finding something you do like about it, and then manipulating the conversation to be more about something that you are passionate about. And still hitting the points of what it is that's, you just have to personalize a topic and find an area that you like. I'm sure there's something to like about every single topic. It might be something very boring. Personally, for me, I have nothing against risk, but it's just not an area that I find super interesting. But you can link it to something that it does interest me. For example, I could talk about the risk matrix or the risk implications of a specific finding in an incident. And I can always link it back to something that I'm comfortable and passionate about.
I really like that because I think one of the things I often do is just either repeat stuff back or emphasize a point. I think what I heard you describe there, Lena, is that the first audience is you. If you are not interested in it or you haven't found the hook for yourself to be interested in it, the audience is going to feel that. And if you lost yourself, no way are you going to keep the audience's attention either.
Yeah, 100%.
So one of the things, there's so much we want to continue to talk about, but maybe you'll start to wrap this up a little bit, is we kicked off talking about your presentation. And you talked a little bit about getting a little bit of anxiety, peeking in, had some jokes that went well. Would you, in hindsight, are there things that you still would have done differently? Is there still something that would be, the next iteration, I'll do that better? Or, just that's that sort of self-reflection on what you did, the reason I'm asking is that you're a practice presenter, you've done presentations, but I think even people starting off, hopefully will see that you had anxiety, you even had mistakes or whatever, that being practiced is still a struggle.
Yeah, I think the core mistake that I think I made that I really thought about after my presentation was I only stepped out from the podium and hung out on the left side. I never ventured or moved towards the right side. So I left half of the stage. It was like 1,000 people in the audience. I left half of the audience, I didn't really walk onto that side. And that was something I was really cognizant of afterwards. I think the reason why I didn't do that was I just got, for some reason, that side of the audience scared me. And subconsciously that made me just avoid that side. It's it's not even an active thought in my head. It's more like when you're on stage, you're not really thinking. You're just kind of just doing things without thinking properly. But yeah, I realized afterwards.
That's funny. Maybe, okay, I got to sneak in a couple more questions then. When those thoughts come up, we talked about practicing. How long, I think we skipped over how you practice, when you feel ready, but how long does it take you to feel practice so you can have that interior monologue with yourself about, or saying oh, this side is scaring me, or I'm getting anxious or my mind is wandering a bit. How do you is it practice that helps you manage that? Is it something else? What are the tricks for that type of stage fright, perhaps?
I think when that happens, it's good to rationalize your thought and just like I recognize how I feel in this moment, but I know that I need to do X, and proceeding to kind of ignore how you feel and knowing what you should actually do. But that's really difficult to ask someone to do in that moment, because in that moment you're juggling presenting in front of someone, standing in front of a group of people that freak you out because no one really likes to be on stage. Oh, I'm sure some people do actually, and I wish I had those. I wish I was like
Perhaps,
that.
Akira.
And then also being able to question yourself and challenge yourself at the same time. It's really hard to manage all of these dreams, but if you're in a position where you know your content so well that you could just say it without even thinking about it, then you have some brain power or brain reserve to handle that. But I respect whoever is in that position. Hopefully I can get there one day.
And practice. And hopefully there's a lot of practice that you'll continue to do, especially on the training, those marathons of presentations. And I'm curious, tell us a little bit about just what courses you have now and what courses you have coming up, and what it takes to build up a new one.
Yeah, so I've got 2 courses out now. The first one is about attacking and defending Azure Cloud security. So it talks about how to perform the attacks in Azure, how to defend them, and how to mitigate the threats. And then I've got another course about advanced APT threat hunting and IR. And that one's tiered towards practitioners in the industry already. So it's tiered towards people already working in IR. And that's the training I offer exclusively at Black Hat, and also for private trainings as well. What's coming is I've got a course on hacking iOS, so mobile exploitation. And next year, an even more advanced course on IR, because as you know, I love IR. So
tell what you love. I'm curious. These are all, you're working on them on your own. Are you looking to expand, or how do you collaborate with others, or have you collaborated with others either on a presentation or a training?
Yeah, so the trainings that are upcoming are actually going to be collaborations, and I'm going to have a few more content creators on board as well for the other topics that I'm going to bring out. So yeah, that's definitely what's happening now.
Nice. Now, I think you were, there's so much more to continue to do. Let me throw around one more. So I'll play moderator here at the end of the end of the presentation. Who in our audience of Akira and John have questions? Maybe John, I'll come to you first, and then Akira. Let's get some final. I'm either more of a question than a comment, or something that you'd like to wrap up here. Our conversation
Akira
with
the
Lena.
microphone first. The one of the things we had in our notes is we wanted to go down the path of sort of what you're doing in a way as a startup. I don't know how much you're thinking about expanding it, or are you thinking about so you've gone from being at the corporate office to being a trainer to now you've got a business, and this is your professional thing now. Do you think at all about are you thinking, talking about being on Ask Questions, are you going to be able to scale this up over the next 18, 24 months? Are you thinking about becoming like the large corporation of training people, or are you at a happy place, or do you think about that at all?
Yeah, so I've actually got a second business launching probably start of next year, and that will be a full online labs platform. So yeah, I'm definitely constantly thinking about scale and how I can, grow the business to be more than just training. Yeah, it is definitely topical. It's something I think about a lot.
Yeah.
Okay, I have one last question. And this might not apply to you, I'm not sure. But one thing that I talked about with a colleague recently was watching panels, which is definitely different than presentation, definitely different than training. But one conclusion we all came to is that panels can be really boring because there's never controversy. There's never dissonant ideas. Everyone's just like, yeah, man, I think that's a really good point, John, or whatever, right? So I'm curious if you ever build in discord or dissonance or contrasting ideas or anything into your trainings or your presentations to capture the audience's interest. And if so, how do you do that?
Absolutely. I love dissonance, actually. So A lot of the times when I introduce a specific topic in my IR training, and keep in mind the people taking my training are already people who work in the field. So it's not like they don't know how to do IR. It's more I'm teaching them more difficult things. So I will take something that's conventionally taught and I will challenge it, and then build an entire exercise where we're forced to complete the exercise doing it a completely different way, and using that to dispel some myths in how a specific incident is supposed to be solved or how a specific forensic technique is supposed to be applied. And that is a constant theme throughout the training. So yes, absolutely. I'm with you. I think having contrasting opinions, contrasting thoughts is really what hooks people in. People find that interesting.
Now,
and I do too.
So we had a last hook that I hope people find interesting. We always ask our guests to describe APSEC in 3 words. Now, Lena, the last time you were here on episode 230, perhaps on theme, both for what you were just saying now about dissonance or because of Halloween, you described APSEC as a necessary evil. I'm curious, do you have another 3 words, or how would you continue to describe APSEC for us?
I think I'm going to stick with the same 3 words and stay consistent with a necessary evil.
That is wonderful. So it is recorded. Now, we thank you very much for giving us a lot of extra time on this interview segment. I want to just also, I think we covered about some of your training and some of the things that are upcoming, but is there anything that we forgot to mention that you want to throw out there and draw people's attention to?
No, I think we covered all of it.
Perfect. And we covered all of it. Our story is done. We've made that emotional connection. We might have snuck in a joke or two, and we got some great personal anecdotes from Lena. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
I want to thank everybody as well. I want to thank John and Akira for joining us. I want to thank everyone for listening once again. We're going to take a quick break and return with news of the week.